The one thing that I would say about the AFC North and each of the teams in this year's draft is that I felt like I could see a clear path or a clear vision in terms of the type of identity they were looking for their organization, the type of players, the type of philosophy they were going to enact within the draft. It felt like, in a lot of ways, that each of these teams had the type of draft in some ways that you would kind of expect them to have for differing reasons. I think one team was the big winner here in the Cleveland Browns, but to be fair to them, it's a lot easier to be the big winner when you have the assortment of draft pick currency that they had and you're picking at the top of a draft. It's a lot easier to win there. And while I don't know that anybody in this division lost, I just thought it was more interesting that each of the four teams, I could see the way the draft played out, was really a match for who that organization was. Like, for example, the Cincinnati Bengals, to me, had the riskiest draft out of anybody. It has tremendous upside. It has tremendous downside. And to borrow from somebody who is the one true GOAT, their ceiling is the roof, and to add on to that, their floor is the floor. There's that much range. I mean, you took a guy in John Ross who set a record in the 40 at the combine, running a 4.22, which is incredible stuff. And sometimes that speed shows up on the field. Sometimes I don't think that level of speed shows up on the field. But here's a guy with multiple major knee injuries who had another, I think it was shoulder injury that he had to get surgery for after the combine, who couldn't even make it through his 40 without getting a cramp. It's always something with John Ross in terms of the durability factor. So the speed and athleticism and explosiveness is there. But if he's not on the field, is it ever going to matter? And even again, I look at that one big spotlight game that he had against Alabama, going against a defense full of NFL players, full of first rounders. John Ross was nowhere to be found, frankly. And you can blame that on the variety of things, but at the end of the day, talent can trump a lot of things, and John Ross didn't just rise to the occasion. So there is tremendous upside here from the Bengals standpoint in terms of he gives you an explosive vertical option to potentially ease some of the pressure on A.J. Green as a receiver, maybe Tyler Eifert as well. But similar to Tyler Eifert, Eifert is nice. But if he only plays 8 games a year, how nice is he really? And for John Ross, same type of thing. Is he always going to have some type of hamstring or an ankle or foot injury or something else, hip problem, quad problem, calf problem? It was always something it seemed like in college. What would be any different in the NFL? You look at their second-round pick, Joe Mixon. And again, similar to John Ross, massive athletic talent and upside, massive ability. But there's the red flags in terms of the character, in terms of the off-the-field concerns. And I've talked about the Joe Mixon situation, and I've talked about the fact I felt like he deserved a chance in the NFL. And even though I had a mid-second round grade on him, I wouldn't have touched him until day 3. And to me, he exhibits some elements that make me concerned that he doesn't end up like another Lawrence Phillips. He's done some stupid things, and he kind of is a knucklehead. Supremely talented and, frankly, supremely stupid in the way he conducts himself as a human being and as a man. And for the Bengals, who have a history of taking chances on guys like this, going back to the Frosty Ruckers and the Chris Henrys and the Adam Pac-Man Joneses of the world, the Fontes Burficts, sometimes talent matters more than anything, and talent trumps all. But sometimes that's why you run into some of the issues that you have in that Bengals locker room and the discipline or lack of discipline on the field is because you kind of frankly have some of these scatterbrained dudes that are a little bit, off the center and aren't always the most disciplined in the way they conduct themselves in their day-to-day lives. Did you really need to add Joe Mixon into the mix, especially when you were in the position you could have just drafted Dalvin Cook? Now, some people will sit there and argue that he had similar off-the-field concerns. Yeah, he's had some issues, but I don't think they're quite as severe as Joe Mixon, and frankly, I just felt that Dalvin Cook was a more talented player. But again, the upside there with Mixon is that he could come in and be a year-1 starter for you and add another element of explosiveness to that Bengals offense. The downside is that he could get in trouble again, get another domestic violence arrest, get suspended, or get into some other type of trouble, and he's out of the league in 2 or 3 years. I look at guys like Jordan Willis and Carl Lawson, and I question the fit for their scheme outside of maybe being situational edge rushers. Jordan Willis has some nice quickness in a straight line, but that's it. Carl Lawson was more explosive 2 or 3 years ago than he has been in the past year plus, and a guy with multiple injuries again. It's just in general, when I look at this draft class for the Bengals, it kind of fits who they are. They will take risks and they will take chances. And this felt like a very risky roll of the dice. Now, maybe they're in a position where they had to gamble here. So I don't completely bury this draft, because I could see the argument, I could see the point trying to be made, is that you have a window of what you feel like is opportunity. And if you're Marvin Lewis, it's probably either the playoffs or your job in 2017. You need to roll the dice and take some chances here. And maybe it really pans out for them. But there is a tremendous downside to what they did. But when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, it just really felt like, to me, a very safe Steeler type of draft. Not one of those ones that's going to grab you by the undercarriage of your nuts and make you jizz, but not one of those ones that I think is going to give you kind of chronic explosive diarrhea in terms of anger and frustration either. Like TJ Watt feels like a Steelers type of prospect. Juju Smith-Schuster feels like a Steelers type of prospect. Cameron Sutton, James Conner, Josh Dobbs, they feel like Steelers type of prospects. Just kind of high character, hard-working, safe type of selections. That's kind of what it was. It felt like the Steelers wanted to hit a bunch of doubles here instead of hitting some home runs. And maybe that's okay, but maybe it isn't. As far as TJ Watt, I thought he was a little overrated in this process. Not massively overrated, but just a little bit. I'm not surprised that he went in round 1, but I don't necessarily think he should have. And he's got some work to get to the point of where he could be. Now, I feel like his upside is decent as an edge rusher, but he's got some work to get there. Juju Smith-Schuster, here's my thing, is we see this almost every flipping year with these USC wide receivers, and I used to get sucked up into it too. But I've said enough is enough. At some point in time, there was enough of a trend, there was enough of a pattern to where, until proven otherwise, you got to stay away from these guys, even in the late portion of round 2 here. What about Juju Smith-Schuster makes you think that Smith-Schuster is much more likely to pan out than a Nelson Aguilar or a Marquise Lee or a Robert Woods or a Kerry Colbert or somebody else like a Dwayne Jarrett or a Mike Williams? What the fuck is so different about this guy? He's another USC wide receiver that's an adequate route runner without big-time explosiveness, that you talk about being physical, but he's really not that physical. He doesn't really bring anything special to the table. I don't get why this is such a bad thing for me to point out that a lot of USC receivers that have come into the NFL in recent years haven't really panned out. Frankly, and I got the same shit 2 years ago when I crapped on the Eagles taking Nelson Aguilar, and how's that worked out? And now I'm going to sit here and kind of crap on this pick a little bit. I don't think he's a terrible prospect, but I wouldn't have taken a USC wide receiver in the 2nd round, period. I honestly think the best pick was James Conner, because he gives you a young, physical, between the tackles type of option, a complement to Le'Veon Bell, and if and when the inevitable Le'Veon suspension or borderline injury comes up, then you've got a guy in James Conner that might be able to step in for a few games and fill that lead back type of role. I did also want to point out I really like the selection of Brian Allen in round number 5. This is a team, I will give the Steelers credit, that spent multiple picks in another draft on the secondary, and guys like Sutton, I think, have some NFL staying power, and I think Brian Allen potentially does as well. Some interesting, intriguing upside there as a bigger, taller corner. Then you look at the Baltimore Ravens. And man, oh man, this felt like an Ozzie Newsome draft. Take safe players, stay true to your board, go in and just take guys. Don't get cute about trading up or down a bunch. Don't worry about needs, just take players. And that's what it felt like the Ravens did. And I think your perspective on the Ravens draft depends on what you wanted them to do. I know some Ravens fans are going to say that they thought this was a terrible draft because they didn't address the offensive side of the ball other than the offensive lineman on day 3. And you know what? They're absolutely right. That was very surprising. And that could potentially be a mistake. When you look at the Ravens at pick 16, If I've got O.J. Howard and Marlon Humphrey on the board, yeah, I could make an argument that the Ravens took the wrong Alabama product. They probably should have taken O.J. Howard with all things being equal. Now, I still had a first-round grade on Marlon Humphrey, but I would have taken O.J. Howard. You know, in round 2, in terms of offensive players, maybe at that point in time you take the guard Dan Feeney from Indiana. You know, maybe that's a thought there. Then you get to round 3, maybe instead of a guy like a Chris Wormley, maybe you're looking at taking some type of wide receiver, maybe somebody, or even in round 2, you want to backtrack to that to make sure you get the right wide receiver. Maybe you take a Cooper Kupp there. Maybe you take a Chris Godwin there. Maybe you take a Carlos Henderson there, a Tywan Taylor there, something. You know, so I get it. You know, but I have to say, even though they didn't really address the offensive side of the ball that much, and that was clearly the bigger need, you could say they're adding strength to a strength. I understand the thought process of even if the defense gets better, how much better is that going to make the team? And there's definitely something to be said about that. But do you want the Ravens to be reaching on offensive players if they're staying true to their board and the defensive player is the higher guy on the board? I just don't think that's the way they should have approached the draft either. So I get the approach of wanting them to focus on the offense because you needed to focus on the offense. You needed to help out Flacco a hell of a lot more than you have. You know, even in 3rd round, instead of taking a Chris Wormley, maybe take a D'Onta Foreman from Texas. I mean, I could make a very strong argument that have felt even better about this Ravens draft if their first 3 picks were O.J. Howard, Chris Godwin, and D'Onta Foreman. And then still you could take Tim Williams there, the edge rusher from Alabama, with your 2nd, 3rd round pick. I thought the Ravens did well in this draft, but yeah, I would have liked that draft more. But it doesn't mean that this draft was bad because I look at each of their picks. I don't see any of them being a reach. I feel like they're good, safe picks. A high likelihood of panning out in the NFL. Marlon Humphrey's a future starter. Tyus Bowser's probably a future starter. Chris Wormley could be a starter. I think Tim Williams has starter upside. Nico Siragusa most certainly has starter upside. Maybe even Eluemunor has some starter upside. So I could look at 6 guys that could potentially be future starters. So I still thought this was a solid draft, even though I understand why Ravens fans, some of them, aren't happy with it. Because, like I said, if I was running the Ravens draft board and I was in that position, it probably would have been O.J. Howard at pick 16. It would have been somebody like Chris Godwin or Carlos Henderson or Cooper Kupp at wide receiver in round 2. Would have been somebody like D'Onta Foreman, the running back, in round number 3. Then I rolled the dice on a Tim Williams. So if they'd have done that, I probably would have said the Ravens were as big of winners as anybody in this draft, not named the Cleveland Browns. Again, I don't feel like they had a bad performance, but I get why some people are not going to like it. I just don't know that I fully agree with it, even though I could make an argument for it. But again, the big winner in this division in this year's draft, and I think, frankly, the big winner in the NFL were the Cleveland Browns. You could see the vision in place from a molding of the football side and the analytics side together. You're looking for good football players with incredible athletic upside, and their 3 first-round picks have that in Myles, Garrett, Jabrill, Peppers, and David Njoku. These are 3 guys that project to be very good football players in my mind, but they're 3 outstanding athletes, 3 top-notch athletes. You're gambling on that athleticism and hoping that they figure it out. And while you got teams like Chicago trading up for 3-2 to take a quarterback, you've got Kansas City trading up for 27-10 to take a quarterback, and you've got somebody else like Houston trading from 25-12 to get a quarterback, and giving up numbers worth of picks in the 2017 and/or 2018 draft. The Cleveland Browns were able to sit and let DeShone Kizer fall to them in the 2nd round of pick 52. What is so fundamentally different between a DeShone Kizer and the 3 quarterbacks I actually went in round 1 to where those other 3 guys were worth trading up for and Kizer was a late 2nd round pick? The answer is not much difference. And in a couple of cases, Kizer was frankly a better physical quarterback prospect to me. So just when you look at it, the way this board went, getting a guy like Ogunjobi in round 3, who I think, if nothing else, is a nice first, second down base player, maybe some small pass rush upside in the middle. Howard Wilson, I think, has got some starting potential as a corner. Roderick Johnson's one of those project offensive linemen that you gamble on and hope for the best. I know people are going to shit on the Brantley pick, and I understand that, but they made it. And they had enough picks where it was worth the gamble for them. Even though Brantley is one of those close but no cigar type of players that could really frustrate you when you watch him because he should be more dominant than he really is. But again, they spent a 6th-round pick on the dude. They had tons of other picks. They had done so well throughout the rest of the draft. It was a worthwhile gamble because if it didn't pan out, frankly, who gives a crap? Because it was just one pick out of many. And when you look at how the Cleveland Browns were able to take the 12th pick this year that they got in the Carson Wentz deal last year, and they turned that into a 2018 first rounder. The fact that this is also a team that not only has 2 picks in round 1, but has 3 picks in round 2 come next year, they're going to be in a major position of power again. They're not all the way there yet, but this was a really, really good start. Last year, when you looked at the Cleveland Browns, it was really hard to figure out what their identity was, or what they were trying to build, what they wanted their team to be about. When you looked at the Cleveland Browns draft this year, you could clearly see what they were trying to do. You could clearly see the mindset in place. And it feels like the type of draft that finally starts to turn that organization around. And if DeShone Kizer can develop into that guy, man, it takes this draft for the Cleveland Browns to a whole different level. And if he doesn't, the Cleveland Browns are going to have so much draft pick ammunition come next year that it probably isn't going to matter because whatever quarterback they're going to want, they're going to be able to get in the 2018 draft. And when you look at the entirety of everything, to me, just the way they played it out, the Cleveland Browns, whatever mistakes they made last year, and it felt like they made numerous, they figured it out this year. Good for them. They weren't the skid marks of this draft.